I believe this is our 109th anniversary board, or at least it is for the week. And so we will commence our meeting, and I will turn it over to the general manager for some housekeeping.
Okay, yeah, just we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance shortly. There are no public participants online right now, but I'll just do some quick housekeeping remarks for the record. And that is to welcome everybody on behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors to this meeting this afternoon. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public participating in person may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda and all related materials are available on the district's website at acwd.org. And you may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This hybrid board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Also, just a note that toward the end of the meeting, the board will convene privately into closed session. Members of the public may remain online or in the boardroom in order to be informed of board reports once the closed session is concluded. Again, that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Okay. Would the secretary please take the roll?
Directors Gunther,
Here.
Akbari,
Here.
Huang, here, Weed,
Here.
and Sethy.
Here. And so how about if Mr. Miyake leads us in salute to the flag? Happy to. To the flag, United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Okay, Director Akbari needs to leave by 7 p.m. and so he set up a goal post for us to have the meeting done by at least that time. That's a good goal post. Thank you. So at this time, we will take public comments on matters on this notice of special meeting from anybody in the public.
Just a note, there's nobody online right now, no members of the public. And looking around the room, nobody in the room either.
That's because this is one of our most exciting workshops. Finance and budgets. All right, so we'll move to item 4 on the agenda, the financial workshop. And I'll turn it over to staff.
Okay, we actually have 2 items under this workshop this evening. One is a review of our financial benchmarking and an overview of where we stand relative to comparator agencies on a number of items that we track. And then, of course, a review of the district's proposed budget for the upcoming 2 fiscal years. But to get us started, I will turn it right over to our Director of Finance and Administration, Mr. Wunderlich.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, members of the board, staff, and public. And this is, of course, the most exciting meeting of the year when we talk about the budget. So I will begin with our customary presentation on our financial benchmarking. And then from there, we will go into our budget presentation. And so we'll just go ahead and kick it off with the benchmarking. Right. Okay, so this is something we do every year, and really we're trying to see how we compare with other similarly situated water agencies in the Bay Area. And it's a really good check against our strategic plan, because if we find ourselves really getting out of line with these other agencies in some of these metrics, unless there's a clear and obvious explanation for that, then, I think that would suggest a need to take a closer look at some things happening here at the agency. And so we'll go just quickly recap the metrics that are used and the comparisons, and then, kind of what does it all mean? Kind of a quick conclusion summary. We do use similar providers. So Contra Costa Water District, Dublin San Ramon Services District, East Bay Mud, Marin Municipal, San Francisco PUC, and one private entity, San Jose Water Company. Some of those entities provide water, sewer, and other services. So we're really just comparing ourselves against their water enterprise for those who have more than one service. And for San Jose Water Company, it's a bit of a challenge because they do not report data in the same way as public agencies. And in fact, their annual report that they publicly disclose was shortened from about 100 pages to about 15 pages for this year. And so we did not have all the same data that we traditionally had. So they're only going to make an appearance in limited metrics where we still have the data. Okay, so in terms of operational efficiency, we look at a few things. Cost of water. This looks at the specific fiscal year, the total cash out the door in that year divided by how much water was produced. And then connections and revenue per employee, as well as operating cost per connection. And then we look at financial capacity, which is really kind of a look at what's the overall ability of the agency to withstand financial challenges. So what's our debt coverage ratio? How are we with our pension and OPEB liability funding? And then our total long-term liabilities divided by operating revenue. And over the years I've been preparing this, I would say over time, and it continues to get solidified, that last bullet on financial capacity, total long-term liabilities divided by operating revenue, I think has become my favorite single metric because I think it really tells the story of how much financial flexibility an agency has. Whether your liabilities come from pension or bonded debt or wherever they come from, the higher they are, the less flexibility you have. And we tend to measure very well there. And I think that's given us a lot of flexibility to maintain lower rate increases. We also had kind of that first year during COVID where we were able to forego an increase for a year. A lot of those flexibilities are provided by our standing on that particular item.
A question, can I ask questions?
Yeah, sure.
When I see eight units or each 100 cubic feet, which I believe is a unit, that's 25 gallons per day, 740 gallons or so, 48 gallons in a month. That would be 200 gallons per day as a typical bill for the district?
Yes, that is our typical bill. For a residential customer, it averages out to about 200 gallons per day.
And so our typical would be, if we're assuming that we're arguing that, I'm trying to do the calculation quickly of what our target is for conservation, which is 50 gallons per day or 2 units per person. That would be a typical person. Peter would have 4 customers, 4 individuals.
Yeah, so based on census data, the average household size within our service area is a little over 3 people. And so if you're looking at 50 gallons per person per day with a household size of about 3.1 to 3.2 people, that gets you up a little above 150 gallons per day. But then particularly in kind of the summer and fall periods when people are doing some outdoor irrigation for their lawn or trees or other landscaping, that gets you to about the 200 gallons per day per connection as typical.
Yes, the delta there is the 6 versus 8, and which is a third higher. So
yeah, and again, that 50 gallons per person per day, I believe, is an indoor target.
is the resident, not the exterior. Okay, so
Correct.
we throw that in there as well. All right, thank you.
I just got my water bill this week and I used 12 units in the past period. The average for the neighborhood was around, I think, 240 or 250. And of properties of similar size, it was like 365. So I got a little appreciation from the water district that I'm using far less water than others nearby.
And overall, our water sales over 20 years have dropped significantly. So,
yep,
even though population's gone up.
Yeah, and that looks at a lot of factors because those water sales numbers for the district would also include industrial customers, outdoor use. And so if you have like an industrial area that's replaced with housing that's very water efficient, it's not necessarily going to use more water. So then in terms of the customer impact, we also compare the typical bills as well as how large our rate increases have been compared to others. Okay, so I've just kind of described what these are. And so going to cost of water, we are just 6 cents above the median here. And this is one that can be highly sensitive to how much water is produced in a year. And especially with the recent drought conditions, I think, we were reasonably successful within our service area with conservation. And so I think, we were at the median. We're just slightly above now.
But if we were, oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so continue to be above the median in terms of connections per employee. Also operating revenue per employee. And then we continue to be below the median on operating cost per connection. So again, this is kind of where we want to be on all these metrics. Debt coverage, we tend to be very focused on using our current revenues to pay for our capital program or using accumulated reserves to pay for our capital program, as we'll get into more details about that as we get into the budget presentation. So we tend to have very high debt coverage. And we've been making some good progress thanks to the leadership that the board has shown with providing additional funds to pay down our pension and OPEB liabilities. And so below the median here. And then we are the median for the monthly bill. You can see A and B are very, very close to us. So we're really just within a few pennies of being below the median. And if you look, I think I gotta get to that one coming up, but I think we're very well positioned to become below the median within the next few years. Then you can see well below the median on rate increase. Again, this is for fiscal year 21-22. So this is not the rate increase we just did. This is the rate increase from a year ago. And then, so this was the slide I was looking at. You can see or thinking about our total liabilities divided by operating revenue. We continue to be well below the median here. So when you look, for example, at our total monthly bill, we were pretty much within a few pennies of agencies A and B, but you can see from this that they'll have less flexibility with what their future increases will look like. Certainly there's, some talk within the Bay Area water community that many agencies are looking at bigger rate increases in the coming years. And so a lot of it is really driven by this situation. Okay, and then variances from last year, our cost per HCF did go up about 40 cents. Again, that's primarily about lower demands during the drought. So our total water production was actually down 10%, or I should say it was down 10% across all agencies. And so we, of course, were no exception there. Our unfunded pension and OPEB liability ratio also decreased quite a bit. Cut in more than half. The median also went down. Again, this is because we're always a year in arrears here, and the actuarial reports are always a year in arrears. So this is getting back to the great market performance that finished in fiscal year ending 21. And then as I mentioned, in terms of the typical monthly bill, we're now within 38 cents of the second lowest bill. Last year, we were $2.25 higher than the second lowest bill. So again, making some pretty good progress on this one. And again, continue to maintain rate increases well below the median for the last 3 years in a row. And so again, just, there are unique situations with every agency, whether they're purchase all their water from third parties, whether they manage all of their own supplies, whether they have a wholesale component or not. So there are just a lot of unique factors to each agency. That's why we don't really focus on how we compare against a specific agency, but we do think that comparing against the median of these agencies is very reasonable and continues to show that ACWD is well positioned with how it's operating. And so with that, be happy to answer any questions on this presentation before we move into the budget portion.
I'd like to know who the purple agency is.
They're the one that has no pension and OPEB liability. Yeah, so that's Dublin San Ramon Services District. They have a long-standing policy of any available reserves at the end of the year get dedicated to their pension liabilities. They're also pretty unique in some factors in the sense of how much of their water comes from Zone 7. And so they're not, say, directly managing a water source like we do with Alameda Creek. And for us, of course, Alameda Creek's only 40% of our water. When you look at an East Bay Mud or an SFPUC, they're managing 100% of their water supplies in-house.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the board? There are no members of the public attending at the moment.
Okay, so we will move to item 4.2, which is the proposed budget presentation.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and kick this one off as well. And we're going to have a tag team effort. We have here with us this evening, in addition to myself, Reika Ipagunta, our project engineering manager, who will present on the CIP. And then, of course, Sydney Elm and Martin Coran from our finance and administration department, who will cover various components of the budget presentation and financial planning metrics. And so we do have a pretty extensive presentation, as we have customarily done in past years. We are happy to move through the first 20 or so slides very quickly. They won't need, and that's the district overview and accomplishments and goals. Those are all available in more detail within the budget document itself, which was included in the packet for tonight's meeting. So unless there are any specific slides there that the board is interested in focusing on, we'll probably skip over those and get straight into our budget process and assumptions. And so then we'll review our typical slides and data in terms of our budget assumptions and overview. And then we will go into the CIP program overview and then review our financial planning model. You know, what is all this is the budget serves as the baseline for our financial planning model and our future rate projections. And so you know, as this is actually kind of a critically important step in providing the inputs for that. And so we'll go over what this proposed budget means and then next steps. And so if we're just as a little foreshadowing, we do have another date scheduled for next week for a second workshop if necessary. If we're able to get through everything and receive the feedback that's needed tonight, potentially we don't need that workshop next week. And of course, we'll be looking for board guidance in these specific areas in terms of you know, what our work objectives should be for the coming year, feedback on the operating budget and the CIP, as well as our general financial planning assumptions and results. And so with that, not seeing any specific interest to go over some of those detailed slides, we'll go ahead and advance to our budget process and assumptions. And I will hand the clicker over to Mr. Elm, who will walk us through the next section.
Good afternoon, President Sethy, members of the board, staff. So I will be presenting the less exciting part of the presentation, I'll leave the more exciting part to Mr. Karan and Ms. Ipa Gunther to present. So this part, so this shows the district 2-year budget cycle. You've seen this before. Right here, we're at the May, the 2-year budget workshop. That's this evening. If you get through everything, this will be the only one. If not, we'll have another one later on. And so this budget proposal will come to you at the June board meeting for adoption. So just and then just to backtrack a little bit, we just finished our rates process and a 2-year budget cycle. So the last June of 2022, the board adopted the mid-cycle fiscal year 22-23 budget. Prior to that, June 2021, that's almost 2 years ago, you adopted the 2-year budget. So here we are with the new 2-year budget for the next 2 fiscal year, 24, 25, 23, 24, and 24, 25. So we talked about assumptions and planned activities. One of the key ones is the forecasted demand. So when we presented to you in various financial workshop, we showed different projected demand based on what we knew at the time. So in February, during the public hearing, we showed you a slightly lower demand forecast. As you know, things have changed. We got weather conditions change. So we were just told that the state water project allocation is 100% of table A now. So we updated our demand forecast to align with what our water resources team is projecting. So in the long term, they projecting a 5-year drought rebound. So the long term kind of ongoing demand is 36 million gallons per day. What we showed to you previously was 34.2 million gallons per day. So that's significant. As you know, 1 MGD is equivalent to about $2.4 million in water revenue. The other key assumption that's changed from last time that we came before you is to assume 4-year assume rate increase in the year beyond the adopted rate increase. So the board adopted a 2-year rate increase, 4% annually, that went to effect March 1 of this year, the 4% effective March 1, 2024. Beyond that, staff updated the assumption to assume 4% annual rate increase. That's different than what we showed you before in our financial planning, which we assume a 3% rate increase. The proposed budget for the next 2 years includes the recent water rate increase by SFPUC. So their board just approved a 9.7% wholesale water rate increase effective July 1 this fiscal year last week. So they approved that last week. As you know, chemical cost has increased significantly. So we built in what we knew as of last week, but we will know kind of the magnitude pending final bid. We should have that at the end of the month, by the end of the month or early June. So when we present the budget to you in June, we'll have an updated number for chemical. Labor and benefits costs consistent with current labor contracts. So no changes from what you've seen in the past. So you see the cost of living adjustment there. And then the new hires, as you know, after January 2019 are enrolled in this defined contribution retiree health benefit plan. So currently there's 84 active employees. I was one of those, or I'm one of those. So we have 244 budgeted positions. So that's about 34% of our budgeted positions that's enrolled in this plan. We're just looking at field position right now with our vacancy, that's about 38%. So that's a significant number. So we just wanted to show you that. So capital improvements with the 2-year budget, as well as the 25-year capital improvement, includes a lot of investment in infrastructure replacement and seismic improvements, as well as the initiative related to water supply reliability. You see these projects, they're big dollar items. advanced metering infrastructure, a main renewal program, and various improvements to our reservoir and pump station. All of these Los Vaqueros reservoir expansion are included in the capital improvement plan, except for Delta conveyance costs, which are included in the operation and maintenance budget. And as Mr. Wanderlich stated earlier, the board decided to continue funding our unfunded liability at a more aggressive level. We call it more aggressive because it's a higher than what we needed to do, based on CalPERS projection. So we're more aggressive. Still on track to have both other OPEB, other post-employment retiree or retiree health and pension plans funded by June 2033. That's what the board wanted to do.
I have a question for you, or maybe Ms. Gunther. How much is in the budget for main renewal each of the next 2 fiscal years?
I'll defer that to Ms. Gunther. You have that.
Because I wrote a note to Mr. Stevenson that I'm hoping that we will expedite our main renewal program and maybe even look at assigning an outside engineering consulting firm to help with the effort, because we are way behind where we were projecting to be 10 years ago.
Yeah, there'll be a separate section of the presentation on the CIP separately, and Reka can go through the main renewal program part of the CIP at that time if you'd like.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Right, so this is the illustrate of not just the budget process, what you saw earlier, it's also the financial planning process. And we talked about the IRP, the 25-year capital improvement plan or program, and what we use our modeling spreadsheet, the financial planning model. And we highlight public input in our financial planning. Unfortunately, there was public tonight, but a lot of public participating in the rates process, and then the board meeting in the past. So that's key into what we present to you. So we're here with the biannual budget. That's just one of the part of the financial planning process. That's just to show that.
On that last chart, to follow up a little bit on Director Sethy's comment, we have the CIP program coming. It'd be interesting to see on our capital improvement program, percentage which goes for environmental mitigation and that which is actually going into the water supply system. Over the last number of years going forward.
Yeah, we may not have that breakdown this evening, but I'd say for the main renewal program, that's not as big of an issue as it is for other types of projects, but Reka will be prepared to talk about that.
Because we spent a huge amount on various, I think, whether it be fish ladders or even AMI, and did not get into the actual production of water. So, thank you. Delivery of water.
Right. Thank you. So this next slide focuses on the general fund. It's looking at the general fund beginning balance and the general fund ending balance. The takeaway, and looking at the revenues and expenses, the takeaway from this slide, I wanted to just point to proposed budget, the 2 fiscal year, proposed budget fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. Notice the change in fund balance, 23.4 million in fiscal year 24 and 21.3 million in proposed budget fiscal year 25. So what this means is that the district is utilizing the accumulated reserve to cover their expenses. This is part of the plan that we presented to you in the past. Part of the rates process, we had a high general fund ending balance, as you see later on when we get to the financial planning model metrics. So that's saying that the district is utilizing the reserve as part of the budget process.
I'm going to make a comment here. I really do not subscribe to that philosophy financially, because I really believe that the reserves that we've built up should be going to CIP projects, and that we should be trying to net out between our revenues and our expenses, come as close to zero as we can, and that we burn cash on actual work out in the field.
So
That's the perspective I come from.
I wanted to note that the expenses here include capital improvement funded by the general fund. So the general fund is all of the general fund, and that's include spending on capital program. And the most of the 23 million that you see there is going towards the general fund funded CIP primarily. I would say almost all of that is funding the a general fund funded CIP. As again, you'll see later on, the revenues is sufficient to pay for really general expenses. But when we add the general fund funded CIP on top of it, which is included here as part of the 171.7 million, then the district would need to utilize the accumulated general fund balance to pay for that. So it's really the reserve are used to fund the capital projects or general fund.
So that's all in the expense bucket.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it's all in the general fund bucket, right?
General fund bucket.
Yeah, and which includes both expense and capital. And so, yeah, you'll see in a later slide how the capital program expenditures are planned and how that is drawing down the general fund reserves. Right, so that is part of the plan.
So the line that says expenses, is that operating expenses plus CIP?
That is correct for the general fund.
For the line item that just says expenses
That is correct. Operations and
plus CIP.
O&M plus CIP.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought we were looking at just the operating side.
We probably should make that clear. Thank you for that comment.
I retract what I said then. I sound like Gilda Radner a long time ago on Saturday Night Live.
Like I said, I get the least exciting. Mr. Coran will show you more detail of both the operating and the capital line items in the presentation. But we should make that clear that it's both.
Like Gilda would say, sorry.
Okay, thank you. The comment. So this the water consumption, we're showing this in various places. You've seen this before as part of the drought update to you. I'm looking at consumption going back to fiscal year 16. The green arrow, which we're through April now, they're below in many years. So that's the message. Or customers been conserving. April, the fiscal year 23 is almost the lowest compared to the other prior years. So that's the message is our customer has been conserving. As you see here on this chart. Now I would turn to Mr. Coran to talk about or review the budget overview.
All right, thank you, Mr. Allen. Good afternoon, President Sethy, board members, members of staff. I'm going to be presenting all the more detail on the budget as Mr. Allen already explained. And just to remind everyone, all of our slides are the same in terms of formatting. So we show 2 years of prior year actual expense, the amended budget, which you approved 1 year ago, the estimated actual for this fiscal year, and then the 2 proposed budget years. So total revenue overall for this fiscal year 23, revenues are expected to come in about 3% above budget, mostly due to more development activity than we anticipated at this time last year. For the proposed budget years, fiscal years 24 and 25, total revenues are expecting to decrease slightly in fiscal 24 due to less grant activity. and then and anticipated development activity. And then increase again in fiscal year 25 by about 5% as demand projections are expected to rebound. So for water revenue, as Mr. Alm already said, forecast demands for this year they're actually coming in as we expected, around 31.3 MGD. Our budget was 31.28, so we were really close. And then increasing next year up to 33.6 MGD, and then after that, coming to a new normal conservative level of around 36 MGD, as Mr. Alm explained already. In terms of grants, we will discuss those, more of those in detail on future slides, but overall, district staff continues to work very hard to pursue additional funding opportunities. And yeah, that's it for this one. And next up is just a little bit more detail on the water revenues. The three major portions of water revenues are on the slide above you. So the consumption charge, as we all know, it makes up about 64% of total water revenues, and this is based on each unit of water that's used. The service charge is approximately 34% of total water revenues, and this is the fixed charge based on the customer's meter size. And there were also the drought surcharges, and which the board rescinded, and that decision was effective April 1st. You can see it drops off. And next slide really is just showing you a comparison of water revenues, budgeted water revenues versus actual water revenues. Over the last 10 years, so the total water revenue budgeted over the last 10 years was $1,026.6 million. Actual revenue that we received over that same time frame, $1,011.5 million. So over that 10 years, the estimates have been higher by about $15 million between the two, which amounts to $1.5 million per year, or approximately 1.5%. Like we were within 1.5% of budget. So we do pretty good. Next up, this is really just the graphic version of the previous table, the total revenues table that illustrates our overall expected revenue change over the budget period based on the most recent assumptions we already discussed. So a combination of rate changes approved by the board along with development activity and expected grants, etc. Now on to grants. Staff has worked very hard to secure the grants that you see up there on the screen, bringing the 5-year total to $26 million in 5 years, meaning actuals from fiscal year 21 through the proposed budget year, fiscal year 25. The grants management team meets monthly to discuss and identify future opportunities to pursue from a variety of sources.
You know what the Prop 1 money was for?
Director Sethy, you asked this question last year, and I had a response, and I don't remember right now. I'll get back to you.
Okay.
I can look it up quickly, but I don't remember right now.
How does the grant funding that we achieved over this 5-year period compare to historical grant opportunities that we've won?
It's actually pretty good. I mean, when we were here for the 2-year budget a couple of years ago, we were looking at $43 million approximately, but we've spent and received that money already on the projects that are ongoing. And so a lot of the grants a lot of the big dollar grants that you see right now are ones that were still awarded before for projects like Rubber Dam 1, the fish ladders and so forth. Right. So that money is still coming in to be reimbursed, but the grants team does really well pursuing opportunities.
The reason I was asking about Prop 1 is because we heard at Aqua last week that there is a whole lot of money still available from Prop 1 outside of financing the big projects, you know, like Los Vaqueros Reservoir. There's a lot of money available, and I'm wondering whether we have an opportunity with Prop 1 and Prop 84 to secure some funding for Quarry Lakes Park. because it does include parks and recreation. Might be a good opportunity.
May I include the reoperation of Del Val?
Yes, that too. And as
100%
old as
financing
Prop
available?
84 is, there's still a lot of money there.
I'll be happy to follow up with the grants team and make sure that's on their radar.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And then Director Akbari, to your question, I think in order to secure grants, you also need to have projects that granting agencies are interested in funding. And so at a really significant level, when we started doing more of our fishery projects in the creek is when we were able to really first obtain really significant grant dollars. And so we really built this grants team, I think, as an outgrowth of the efforts to obtain grants for those fishery projects. And then we continue to work and see, and you can see there are future programs we're still trying to get some money for. Probably the biggest one is potentially the FEMA hazard mitigation grant program to try to get some money for seismic retrofit projects with the reservoirs.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich. So yeah, what you see here is our grants that staff is currently working on. There are state grants for groundwater, PFAS treatment, deep aquifer wells, and conservation programs, and then federal grants assisting with repairing the damage from the January atmospheric river storms, as well as various mitigation grants for seismic retrofits that Mr. Wunderlich just mentioned. So the detailed breakdown of all of those is here over the 5-year period. You'll notice there is a 6th year in there, but that's the fiscal year 23 amended budget. That $8.7 million at the bottom is not included in the 26 million because we're expecting to receive, of that 8.7 we were expecting a year ago, we're expecting to receive 6.7 million of that. So then the remaining amounts will come in over the next 2 budget years. So we're expecting.
That reminds me of a question I wanted to ask. I saw that there was a presentation that was also going to be on Zoom about rehabilitating Darwan 1 well.
We weren't doing a public outreach meeting on Darvan, unless I'm missing something.
There is
I saw the posters in the back.
yeah, I think it's for dips, probably.
Oh, well, you're welcome to attend. That's not a public presentation. That's a staff presentation, keeping a monthly presentation series we do. This is sharing with staff what's going on with Darvan 1, the aquifer reclamation well.
Yeah, it sounds boring, but.
Oh, no, it's
pretty-
super exciting.
I'm really interested, and so I wanted to find out if that's going to be recorded since I saw.
It will be
was on-
recorded, yeah.
Because I'd like to watch that,
Yeah, okay.
but not before tomorrow's board meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we actually do have Prop 1 identified here for brackish groundwater related project, about 1.1 million.
Yeah, and there are other what we've not done here is tried to exhaustively list each grant program and each project together. But we've got other projects that we've put in for, been successful with Prop 1, and also the other monies that we're going after currently.
Is that money going to be used at the desal plant, or is it to explore other opportunities?
Yeah, this is, and Laura can correct me, but this is related to new ARP wells,
Correct.
source wells for the desalination facility.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then for Prop 1, you'll notice there's
Sorry to
also,
interrupt your presentation.
no, it's okay. This is why we're here. Prop 1 regional conservation, and then there's also coastal conservancy Prop 1 for RD3. That's the Prop 1 money that we have so far. All right, next up, total expenses. So overall, total expenses, so all funds are estimated to come in $13 million below budget this fiscal year. And that's mostly as a result of shifted capital project schedules. So if we're comparing the amended budget, bless you, the amended budget for fiscal year 23 with the proposed fiscal 24 and 25 operating budget changes, capital projects have shifted. So we're expecting in comparison to the amended budget, we're expecting an additional $7 million in capital projects over the next couple of years. And Ms. Ipukunta will present that in more detail. Water purchases, there are increased demands as well as the increased costs from SFPUC. So those are built in. Chemical pricing, from the data that we already know, it's already added $1.5 million of expense just from the chemical cost increases. And then negotiated labor contracts are already built in. It's not, you've seen this already. And then expense projects comparatively are going to be down $1.8 million. That just means some other projects will be done. So for source of supply, the cost budgeted, large swings in this category are driven by the cost of purchased water, mostly. And then we have an O&M, power and chemicals. So I mentioned those already. OPEB and pension advanced funding, that's built in there. That's in the administrative and general line. And keeping with that, aggressive payments ending for payoff July 31st, 2031. And then debt service, the debt service up there, it's the current debt schedules, including the 2022 refunding bonds that we just did this last year. So that's all in there, about $5.9 million moving forward. And this is the beautiful picture of the table, the data table we just saw. So you can really see the estimated actual for this year is significantly less than the budget, but then grows next year due to various increasing costs. And also part of this cost is staffing, right? So this year's estimated actual is based on actual staffing. We budget at full staffing. We'll get into a little more detail on the staffing in a few more slides.
It's shown in colors on this chart. On the last, we had numbers, but water treatment had a huge jump from 22 to 23. What was the reason for that? Because of the blending? And
Well,
PFAS?
Yes. Yeah. For this year, there's a lot more San Francisco water being purchased.
And that was considered part of the water treatment cost.
I think the
No, I'm
water,
sorry. No, that's source of supply. I was looking at source of supply. You said water treatment. I'm sorry.
yeah, I think that's going to be the chemical costs.
Yeah.
We've seen a huge increase in chemical costs the last couple of years.
It just showed up in this transition now from 22 to 23. Okay.
Yeah, it's been pretty sudden and pretty significant.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And I apologize. I misunderstood initially.
No, I was my misleading question.
So budget, yeah, so total cash balances. So above are the actual and estimated cash balances for all funds for the beginning and ending of each fiscal year. Fiscal year 22, so last year it ended better than we initially estimated. And so fiscal year 23, the actual was better as a result. So you'll see the 23 amended budget column shows 202 million, and then the estimated actual is based on the actual, which was 208 million. So we did better last year. So taking into account the revenues and expenses we already discussed, we expect to finish this fiscal year actually $25 million better than the amended budget. But if you look at fiscal year 25, now we're projecting to be $49 million below this year's estimated actual, and that's really the result of capital project spending and increased water purchases.
Do we have our investment returns included in that ending cash balance projected earnings?
Yes. Yeah, investment returns are part of the revenues that are up on the screen.
Because we're getting pretty healthy returns right now.
So next up, reserves and debt indicators. Really, this shows the reserve policy approved by the board last year. The main takeaway here, if you look at the bottom lines, the reserves meet or exceed the established targets. Our debt service coverage target is 200%, and we are well above that. On to operations and maintenance expenses. So here's a more detailed breakdown of those expenses. The costs are highly dependent on water purchases, power, and chemicals, which can fluctuate widely from year to year. So this is the chart that shows the data we just looked at. You can see the expenses are growing. Everything is getting more expensive. So that's all built in. We get into administrative and general costs. So these include district-wide benefits for all employees. So everything is in here. Also, it's everybody's, that other pay line includes everybody's sick leave, vacation leave, everything else. That's all in administrative and general cost. This year, we're expecting to come in 8% below budget. Next year will be about 4% lower than the amended budget was, and then we'll be increasing slightly the following year. Again, the budget years, the proposed budget years are based on full staffing, and the estimated actual for this year is based on our actual staffing levels. Yep. There's another pretty picture.
Do you have a question? Just out of curiosity, the election expenses, were those impacted at all by our switch to districts? Does that make it more expensive or less expensive for us to operate the elections?
It does make it less expensive, and those costs, yeah, and you can see them there. They're built in basically every other year. The actual, so in 2021, the actual cost $625,000. That's what we had budgeted for this year. And since there was no election cost needed, we saved that money. And I think that was based on 3, right? 3 districts this year. And then the next one was 2. This one's 2. Okay. Well, 421 is, yeah, it's a proportion. I'd have to go look at the specific math, but yes, it will be less on an ongoing basis as a result. All right, general fund expenses. This is the fund chart. This breaks down the percentage total of general fund labor and benefits costs by cost center, including capital projects and customer capital contributions, which is something I should bring up. In the past, we've always called them customer jobs. This last year, we learned that there are 2 different types of customer jobs. So we decided to rename the main ones that you would see in the budget to customer capital contributions. It's also a bit more accurate as to what we're trying to convey. And so that's why the name changed, customer capital contributions. So really what this chart shows is the total general fund proposed budget for this upcoming fiscal year, $171.7 million, of which you see the darker shades, and then you see the kind of the polka dot versions of the same color. The polka dot ones show the labor portion of that particular cost. So for operations and maintenance, the total percentage of the general fund budget would be 29%. 19% of that is labor. And so for a source of supply, 29% is their total portion, 5% of their budget goes to labor. So overall, in this picture, 35% of total general fund cost goes to labor. And this includes, salaries and benefits. It's all in. For fiscal year 25, it's a slight increase overall to $176.6 million, but the labor portion of that still remains around 35%. So it's actually really, really low, right? The city is more like 85% labor, just because they provide so much more service. But we are very infrastructure heavy. That's why. Some details now on labor expenses. So this year's actual is based on actual staffing, and the proposed budget years are based on full staffing. So that's basically it. Employee benefits, really the same. It's the same point, right? Estimated actuals are based on what's going on now, and the proposed budget is based on full staffing. That's like the big takeaway from this. Also, pension and OPEB costs still remain consistent with the board's actions to aggressively fund associated and funded liabilities. And then all other medical costs and everything, those costs are based on what we know now and then inflated by the data that we have from our actuarial reports.
A question on this, when you see wild fluctuations on a social security line,
Mhm.
why do we go from 3 to 38?
So
Back
our-
down to 4.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Our temporary staff that we have, that we usually pay through temp agencies, or we just have, temporary staff that we pay Social Security, right, for them. There's also, so we budget based on a total number of temps that we expect to have, and we don't always have that many. I don't remember how many, maybe we budget for 20 and we end up having 3. And so our costs are significantly lower. Overall, $3,000 or $38,000 in the grand scheme of the cost is very, very little, but that's why you see that wild fluctuation.
Interim temporary employees that may be carried over to future years, but we can't budget for them beyond the current year, the next year.
Well, we do budget for,
Well, we go from 3 to 38. That's in 23, which means we have a number of temporary employees on board currently.
no, our estimated actual is 4,000. So we assumed we would have $38,000 worth of Social Security cost based on the salaries that the temporary employees would have. But then we haven't filled all of those temporary positions.
So John, if I may, if you look at the higher number, they are all estimated. So we are estimating to hire more people. And then when you look at the estimated actual, it's a lot lower because that's the number of people we actually hired or used.
Correct.
Is that the way to look at it, Mr.
Yeah,
Correa?
yeah, absolutely. It's basically, we budget at full staffing and then
All right,
we have vacancies.
I think I'm getting it. Thank you. It's not a huge number, so.
Yeah.
Or the variance.
And we'll get into the vacancies right now. So the chart above now shows our full-time equivalents as well as retirements. So authorized positions. You'll see fiscal year 17. I just tried to squeeze as many years in there and make it still readable. But fiscal year 17, we had 230 authorized positions. And now we're up to 244. 10 of those 244 are defined term positions. And our current vacancies for this year are 25. I think our 5-year average is 15. And we've had a lot of big retirements over the last couple of years as well. And we're expecting some more. So far this calendar year, we've had 3 retirements. Last year, we ended up calendar year 22 at 5 or 9 retirements.
So if we filled all those vacancies, then we'd be up to about 270 employees or something?
No. Our total head count, basically, right? Our total is 244. So right now, out of the 244, 25 of those positions are vacant.
I see. And how long are these positions open on average?
That is a wonderful HR question that I can either get back to you or perhaps Mr. Wunderlich, representing finance and administration, would like to chime in.
Yeah, it really depends on the position and how quickly we're able to get to and through a recruitment. Sometimes there are delays getting to a recruitment because there may be an interest in reconsidering the appropriate type of position for the work. Sometimes for certain positions, like looking at Mr. Aaron's for our distribution maintenance division, which is our largest individual work group. We have about 35 utility workers. So for example, they usually do a recruitment once a year that might hire anywhere from 3 to 5 utility workers based on turnover during the year. But that's a pretty big process. So like we don't do a utility worker recruitment each time somebody leaves or retires. We do that like once a year. So it really will depend on the position. Obviously we're going through, we just finished a recruitment for our HR manager position. We knew exactly what that position was. It was a high priority to get out. It probably only took a few months to get through that recruitment. So it just really depends on the position and, kind of what the needs are related to that work and department.
Yeah, I was reviewing the data in the San Jose Mercury Sunday News on the unemployment statistics by county, and we're down to like 3.2% in Silicon Valley and 3.5% in Alameda County. Unemployment statistics that haven't been seen since 1969.
Yeah, it can
So
be.
I'm asking the question because we're in a very tight labor market.
It is a tight market, and again, that also depends on the position. For example, we when somebody applies for a job with us, they may also be applying for jobs other places, right? Because they're looking for a new opportunity somewhere. And we definitely have situations that occur where we get to our preferred candidate at the end of the process, make an offer, and then they don't accept it. And then depending on how you felt about the other candidates, maybe you can go on to your next candidate, or maybe you need to start the process all over again. So we do encounter that
Well,
occasionally.
let me ask one more question, because this kind of impacts our ability to get our CIP projects done. How many vacancies do we have in engineering?
I'll let Mr. Awoke answer that question.
Yeah, so the division that oversees and implements CIP is the project engineering division. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
As of late, we had one position that we've been trying to fill, a senior engineer position we've been trying to fill for over a year now, I think. It's been a little difficult to find the right expertise and experience for that particular position, which will focus on the main renewal program. We recently lost one engineer in that group as well. So technically we have 2 vacancies. Rekha, chime in if I'm missing any other positions.
Mr. We have 2 vacancies, and one is senior engineer and one is the recently for the open position because of resignation.
Yeah, and that senior engineer is an example of one where we got to the end of a process, made an offer to a candidate, but by that point, again, they were probably applying for jobs elsewhere. They had moved on with a different opportunity. And so that kind of puts you back at square one with resuming a recruitment process.
Well, this is just my personal point of view, but I believe if we were to add to headcount here in the district, that we should add headcount to engineering, so that we can keep pace on our programs and help speed up our main renewal efforts. So that would be first priority for me.
Yeah, and that senior engineer that was mentioned is the person that we have, that position we have targeted to sort of be the program manager. A big part of the main renewal program. Obviously, there's other engineers working on the various parts of the program, but in terms of having a coordinating focus, is that senior engineer position. It's been really, really tough to fill that. And many other engineer positions, particularly electrical engineers and so forth, those are tough to fill.
Just realized your tie matches my shirt.
Yeah,
Maybe I
but
should
You
buy
got
that
good
from you.
taste.
In terms of the overall budget proposal itself, though, we may get to that or we may not, because there's nothing big to report, but we are not proposing, as you can see here on this slide, to add to the total number of authorized positions within this budget window. I believe we do have a reclassification of an IT position from a network technician to an IT administrator position. But I don't believe we have any other staffing related changes that are proposed as part of the budget.
Is the internship program included in this, or is that a separate item entirely?
Yes, so this is full-time benefited positions. So this does not include interns or temps within these numbers.
And interns or temps could be benefited under some circumstances if we wish, but particularly when we're looking for more qualified temps and interns. But I would encourage us. So do we have a separate budget item for an internship program?
Yeah, so I believe within the budget, we identify temporary intern work experience student types of positions in addition to these 244 full-time positions.
If that could be briefed to us at some point, I'd appreciate it.
Okay,
It's
so
something I'll encourage us to try. We've had some pretty good experience with interns in the past, staying with the district and getting promoted up through the system.
I'm looking over at Mr. Alm, and maybe we can make a note of that when we bring the budget back for board adoption to highlight what those numbers are.
Thank you.
Since we're going to adopt this budget next month, I would suggest adding in 2 or 3 positions to the forecasted headcount. Is that reasonable in your?
We'll do what the board asks us to do. Staff right now, we have, it sounds like you're really focusing on the capital program. We did add 2 positions right about the time that I came on board as your general manager. We're still trying to fill one of those. We wouldn't object to the board adding those positions to the personnel budget. It just may not be that we bring them on board right away. It does take time and resources to bring folks on. We also have workspace limitations and so forth too. So I guess we'll take direction from the board on that issue.
We do have a limited term employment in place now. We can bring people on without having to make the long-term commitment.
Those are budgeted positions though, but yes, it wouldn't be necessarily a permanent ongoing position.
And there's also the opportunity of leasing office space because there's quite a bit open around here as well.
So I guess I do have a preference not to add the position at this point. I'd rather staff actually spend some time to look at other options to accelerate the program or keep pace with the program and come back with a recommendation. We could definitely look at this again during our mid-year budget review. Because at this point, my feeling, and this is just based on a sense, is that there might be other options out there besides just go right out and hire 2 new positions. If there are ways we could go through contracting, that could actually be more nimble than having us spend 6 months trying to hire someone.
Yes.
So, right, the end goal is to implement the program. The end goal is not to add headcount. I think you have across the board agreement.
I can go along with that.
So-
As I suggested earlier, I'm really trying to encourage us to go to an outside engineering consulting firm to help
But there was a whole
expedite things.
at Aqua, there was a program on progressive design build. I note that our staff attended, which seemed to have the potential for getting involved in an early stage with the developer, with the designer, and getting into and starting the phase of the contract and expediting the programs and through its completion.
Yeah, and Ms. Ibagunta would be better positioned to kind of share what we're doing going forward, but our plans include all of that, right? Additional consulting services, additional types of project delivery approaches, contracts, and so forth. And so yet we don't see just adding staff as the solution because you have to have staff to manage contracts and consultants, right?
Yeah.
So
I attended the South Bay Engineers Club presentation on this very subject, and there were a handful of our ACWD employees there too. So I know they're familiar with the evolving legislation and changes that have been adopted in California law to make these things possible, whereas in the past it was prohibited.
yeah, your own Dr. Awoke actually is a certified special or alternative contract delivery person. So he's helping us through that too.
Okay,
Back to the speaker.
thank you. And actually that conversation helped my memory. We have 244 full-time equivalent positions. We have 12 temporary intern work experience positions. So if you include those, then we have 256, right? And those 12 work experience intern positions, those are the ones that are related to the Social Security line you were talking about. I just couldn't remember the name of them.
We have a program every year where we give awards for students competing. We had some incredibly bright young high school age students who would make some struck me, in each case would be a wonderful intern to have on board for future. And that's a program that hopefully does not have a cap on it. Thank you.
Yeah, moving on to purchased water. As you'll notice, the cost for this fiscal year, so the estimate for fiscal year 23 is significantly higher. Although we got a lot of rain, we were still operating as, it was a dry year. And we drew down a lot of water from semi-tropic, and therefore those costs were higher this year. Then next year, we'll be going back to just the regular kind of semi-tropic admin fee that we just normally pay. So you see semi-tropic decreases significantly. And then San Francisco Water, there was the, their rate increase. And we're also buying more of it to deal with the contaminants of emerging concern. And then demands are projected to increase as well. So for power, as you know, power is based on two major factors here at the district. One is water demands, and the other one is PG&E rates. So pumping energy costs are very strongly tied to water demands. In turn, water demands are very strongly influenced by the weather. So overall, energy consumption is down 3% this year, while electrical costs have actually increased significantly, so 27%. And fun fact, PG&E has increased their rates every quarter since 2018. So the more we try to be efficient, the more they raise their rates. And then also this year, booster pumping energy has been, use has increased significantly because of the outage at Kirtner Booster Station. Next up, chemicals. We discussed these already, but you can really see how the cost of chemicals has skyrocketed. We need the chemicals to treat raw water to drinking standards. And water quality this year has actually been very problematic with the extremely wet beginning of the year. Right after all of, several dry years, it's just treatment plants have required a lot more chemicals to clean the water. And then just as examples of a couple of chemicals that have increased significantly. So fluoride increased 48%, sodium hypochlorite increased 99%. Those are just two of them. And just as a reminder, the district participates in a regional consortium to ensure the best possible pricing for these chemicals. All right, and this is my last slide of the evening on debt service. So the slide above shows the district's debt service as well as outstanding debt. And this is just according to our official debt service schedules. Annual debt service is $5.9 million going forward as of today, if we don't add anything new. And with that, I will hand it off to our project engineering manager, Rekha Pagunta, to discuss the district's capital improvement program. I'm also happy to answer any questions.
I thought in an earlier presentation, we were looking at going out for bonds in 2025. So we're no longer going to do any of that. When,
Yes.
better question is, when is it projected?
Yeah, so we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Mr. Allen was going to cover this at the end, but as we were preparing the budget, we determined based on the current status of district reserves and projected capital expenditures, it was not necessary to issue bonds in fiscal year ending 25 to stay above our reserve target, that it could now be deferred to fiscal year 26. So that's why you don't see it in this 2-year budget. But Mr. Allen will review some of those assumptions toward the end of the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Rekha, do you need me to move the slides for you?
No, I think Marian is moving the slides. Okay, good evening, members of the board, staff, and members of the public. My name is Rekha Pagunta. I'm the Project Engineering Division Manager. I'm actually unable to attend in person today because of some back issues. I'm unable to stand for longer duration. My apologies for that. But I would be happy to provide the presentation and be able to answer any questions. At the end, I did make a note of the questions that came up during the first half of the presentation. I'll go through those as we get to the appropriate slides. And before we go into the meat of the presentation, I want to add some excitement to this presentation. I want to take a moment to update you on the investments we have made in our communities with the budget approved in the last 2-year budget cycle. The top left-hand side, the picture that's very familiar to all of you, it's our fish passage, RD1 fish passage, and we have completed RD1 fish passage and shin screens in the last 2-year budget cycle. That concludes our decade-long fish passage program. And in the top middle slide, middle picture is our Valsitos channel improvements. This was also completed during the last 2-year budget cycle, and it was a timely project that helped us through the drought. And the slide on the picture on the left-hand side, bottom side, is our Avalon tank slope stabilization project. This project was completed just in time to avoid any adverse impact from the atmospheric storm events that we all have experienced recently. And then we have completed several other projects. I'm not going to go over everything, but I just wanted to provide a few examples here. And as the main renewal program topic came up, I wanted to provide an update there as well, that we have replaced about 2.6 miles of pipeline. The pipelines have been commissioned and in service in beneficial use, and these were commissioned in the last 2-year budget too. So overall, we have spent more than 80% of the capital approved by the board in the last cycle, and thanks to the board for letting us make these important investments in our communities. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the agenda, the first half of the presentation, I'll briefly go over the CIP framework and some important status updates of the CIP and overview. In the later part of the presentation, I'll focus on the highlights of the proposed CIP. Next slide, please. So the purpose of CIP, or the purpose of this presentation, is to inform the board of our updates that we have made to our CIP, which is a long-range plan which captures 25 years of capital or infrastructure improvements necessary to operate the district. And the main focus will be on the 2-year budget cycle. That's I would like to inform the board the funding that is necessary to implement the capital program in the next 2 years for the implementation schedule. And we also update the CIP annually just to make sure that we are able to address our annual fiscal constraints through the financial planning model. Next slide, please. So the board has seen our comprehensive CIP plan many times, but just for the benefit of the public or a refresher, I'll quickly go over this. Our CIP incorporates projects and programs to meet district strategic goals and integrated resources plan. CIP also incorporates engineering report recommendations. We are currently going through the next round of engineering report. Some of the recommendations, draft recommendations, have already been incorporated into the updated CIP that you will be seeing in the next few slides. And the CIP also incorporates operational capital expenditure, including projects needed to meet regulatory requirements and any life cycle maintenance of assets. Additional feasibility studies that you will be seeing as part of the extraordinary expense projects. The findings or the recommendations from the feasibility reports will also be captured as part of our 25-year capital plan if those findings indicate replacement of any assets or adding any new assets to the system. Next slide, please. So the budget targets are established using the guidance from the financial planning model and also our water rate study. So for this round of CIP, the target for the proposed budget was to stay within $197 million over a period of 3 years. The 3-year duration is between fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2025. The total of the 3-year budget should stay within $197 million. And as you'll see in the later slides, our proposal has been validated using the financial planning model, and it is within the financial guidelines. Next slide, please. So a brief overview of the capital program status. As I've mentioned before, this is a biennial status update. That means every 2 years we come to the board requesting budget approval for the implementation of the program in the next 2 years. We have invested $43 million in fiscal year 2022 for the capital program. That was 80% of the adopted budget or approved budget by the board. And we have added, as part of this round, we have added new projects. We added about 30 to 35 new projects to the CIP. And we also reevaluated the existing projects in the CIP. We look at the priorities of the projects, strategies for implementation. The CIP included the reevaluation of all the existing projects and addition of new projects that are required for operating the district. And the total number of projects in the updated CIP are close to 200 projects. We also have removed some projects that have been completed from the CIP just to remove the noise. So overall, the 25-year horizon will be focusing on those 200 projects. And then as we were updating the CIP, we also looked at our cost estimates. We do using in-house built internal tools for cost estimating, relying on our own cost estimate templates based on projects completed in the last few years. So we revised all the cost estimates for near-term projects to reflect inflation for current market conditions. As you are all aware, the inflation has hit the record high in the last year. So we adjusted our cost estimates to incorporate the rise in inflation. We also updated our fringe and overhead rate. The current fringe and overhead rate is 165%. So all the budgets have been revised to incorporate the district's fringe and overhead. And all the budgets presented, the spreadsheet was provided as part of the handout, as part of the package. The numbers that you'll see on the spreadsheet, those are all provided in 2023 dollars. So all out-year budgets are preliminary. We didn't go through the detailed estimating for out-year projects. However, all the budgets are presented in 2023 dollars. And also as part of the biennial update, we go through the resource requirements as well. So we completed labor to spread analysis and reviewed and revised the project implementation schedule for the next 2 years. So the implementation of the project and the priorities of the projects depend on the resources that are available to the district. And based on the resource plan, we prioritize the projects for the next 2 years. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I'll provide an overview of the CIP. I can take a pause if there are any questions so far.
Rika, how many slides are you going to go through?
I have about 18 slides, 18 more slides. Okay, so if there are no other questions, I'll proceed with the remaining slides, and I'll also take a pause, or feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions as I go through these slides. So this is the CIP overview. So it's pretty self-explanatory. This is a comparison of our proposed budget in comparison to our adopted budget that we brought 2 years ago. On a 2 year, so the way we are presenting this is short term, medium term, and long term. The short term is the 2-year budget cycle, which is what the board will be approving the budgets for. And the 10-year is our medium term, which is primarily ties up with our engineering report recommendations. And the 25-year is our long-term CIP plan. We are seeing an increase of 20% budget in the 2-year plan and 42% budget increase in the 10-year plan. And overall increases over 25-year horizon is 27%. The key takeaways from this slide is our capital infrastructure needs are growing due to aging infrastructure and new regulatory requirements and other needs. And our average investments have increased from $50 million to $60 million in the near term. And significant changes are identified in the 10-year duration, which contributed to nearly 42% increase. And the overall plan also increased by 27%. And as I mentioned, most of the new projects were added in the 10-year horizon. And that's the reason for the 42% increase.
Okay, Reka, just so you know, the board right now is receiving the CIP spreadsheet handout. I know you're not planning to go through that spreadsheet in any detail, but just so you're aware, they have it. And I know you're just summarizing some key points about the CIP. And so just so that you're aware, and for any members of the public that view this, the CIP spreadsheet is available on our website under this meeting as supplemental materials.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson.
I also wanted to ask if anyone needs to take a quick break, because I could use one. Good, 5 minutes. Break.
Okay, Reka, we're going to take a 5-minute break,
Okay, sounds good.
and it's 5:27.
Mr. Evo, can we start now? I'm just trying to see if everyone is back.
Oh yeah, we're back. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I'll proceed with the remaining presentation. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a capital expenditure in a 5-year horizon. The table provides our actual investments over the last 2 fiscal years and a revised projected expenditures for the next 2 years. The actual program investments were 52 and 43 in the last 2 years. And in the next 2 years, we are being ambitious to spend about $58 million in year 1 and $61 million in year 2. We have dramatically improved the efficiency of the program, as evidenced by the increase in our investments. The amount of money we have been investing has increased by 2-fold. Remember, in the prior rounds, our investments were in the range of $15 to $20 million, and now we are in the range of $40 to $50 million. And at the same time, our efficiency of our projections has also increased. We were in the range of 60% of authorized budget. Now we are getting close to investing 80% of the authorized budget. And we are always looking for ways to improve the efficiency of the program. And I think those are the major takeaways from this. Next slide, please. So this is a comparison of the programmatic changes, mostly focusing on our large programs. The board is very familiar with these programs. Overall, on the CIP, as you have seen in the previous slides, we have added about $380 million to the CIP. Half of that is actually coming from the main renewal program. There is an increase of 25% toward the main renewal program. I'll take a few moments to address some of the questions here. I think one question was, what is our projected investments in the next 2-year cycle? We are looking at investing about $20 million, average $10 million in the next 2 years. We have about 6 projects in the CIP that we are currently working on, or will start working on, which would be captured as part of the 2-year budget cycle. And coming to the 10-year or medium-term budget cycle, our overall investments for the main renewal program are $105 million. That's where we added meat to the program. We added about 13 new projects to the CIP as part of the main renewals. We have about 33 miles of pipeline included in the first 10-year budgets. And these are very specific to the main renewal prioritization matrix. We have completed several workshops and identified the high-risk projects for the district where the investments are beneficial to the district. So we have altogether 21 projects in the CIP with a total of 33 miles of pipeline. And out of these 21 projects, 13 projects have been added as part of this round, which adds up to a total of 17 miles. And also in terms of the resources, we are already using consultants on several large projects to provide design services, and the construction management has been done in so far. And we also been trying different modes to identify and optimize the program. And there are projects where we have design consultants reviewing our design and providing input and using our own resources for drafting. So that's another mode that we are doing. And we also have a project, a program in the CIP in the next 2 years. That is for City of Fremont, small diameter program. There were several projects in City of Fremont that we couldn't move forward because of certain requirements related to AC pipes. So we are using design build approach for those projects in City of Fremont because that would be appropriate for the type of replacement that we'll be looking at, which is going to use Highline system. So we are already trying different modes of delivery approaches here. We are using design build, we have used consultants, and we are continuously using consultant designs, and some projects we are doing in-house design with consultants reviewing the designs. So I wanted to address those questions. And then coming to the remaining programs, so we do have seismic improvement projects. Mostly these projects are related to reservoir roof replacements. Most of these roof replacements are to meet the revised seismic code. And fish passage project, this has been a major program on our list, and now the investments on this project are going to drop to $2 million. That's mostly, we have a programmatic line item, $25 million per year to address any operational considerations and also any future environmental requirements or regulatory requirements related to BIOP. So that's a placeholder to address any future changes, minor modifications to the facilities. And AMI is another project. And the budget has reduced. The reason is that we have already implemented about 32,000 meters as part of the program. So the budget you are seeing is only for the remaining installations. And there is also a co-project as part of AMI. And service line and meter replacement, this has been on our list for a long time. This is the main meter replacements are still required in addition to the AMI project for large meters and the meters that were not replaced as part of AMI. So that's the highlights of the programmatic changes to the CIP. Next slide, please.
May I ask two questions? First of all, I did not see Delta Conveyance on your CIP spreadsheet. Is that being handled independently?
Yes, I'll take that one. Because those charges come to us through the state, they're actually considered an operating expense for the district, and they are accounted for within our long-range financial planning model.
Okay. Next, Los Vaqueros. We were told last time it would be almost $100 million. Now it shows on this chart is the 25-year total of being just under 125 million. Two aspects on that. One, did we have a $30 million bump, or 40, 50? It was almost a 50% increase in estimate. Did that increase by almost 50%? In the last year? And second, we're told that we had three options: a tunnel only, a pipeline only, a pipeline with operational storage, or 9,000 acre feet of dedicated storage with the pipeline. Have we costed out those three options?
Yeah, so really what that costs increases as a result of staff creating a more refined estimate of our future costs. So it's not that something specific with our participation or the program has changed. We had kind of really a placeholder number that's been replaced with the preliminary estimate of our actual cost of participation. And that's our fully loaded participation, including our share of capital costs and future operating costs. And then it's based on an assumed participation in both storage and conveyance. And so we continue to work within the Joint Powers Authority to kind of develop the rules of the game for participation in that project. At this point, the board has not made a firm commitment to participate. And so we will be bringing an updated business case to the board probably in the next couple of months on that project. But as we discussed at the Water Resources Workshop, I believe that was in April, right? About 3-4 weeks ago. There's really nothing new to report since that workshop as it relates to this project. And at this point in time, staff continues to consider storage necessary to have a place to store the water. If we had no storage, again, it would just become a bypass for the South Bay Aqueduct and the pumping plant as an alternative, but it's the storage that helps really provide the supplemental water supply. So again, nothing new to report since the workshop last month, and we are preparing an updated business case, most likely at the July board meeting as it stands now.
We're continuing our discussions to acquire additional storage at Del Val, which would substitute for the storage at Los Vaqueros, I trust. And it strikes me that the bulk of the cost of Los Vaqueros is the reimbursement of Contra Costa of almost 100% of their actual cost, approximately 100% of their actual cost of building LV 1 and 2 plus the watershed. And that if we would only invest into the conveyance of the tunnel. Second, it was noted at this last conference that the storage at Los Vaqueros may actually be oversubscribed, with the Bureau of Reclamation suddenly coming across a lot of money to put into additional projects, including sites. So they're in the market for, they have the money to spend on storage. And Westlands would certainly be happy to get that additional water. So I think hopefully we have some options, and hopefully we make a determination to have a limited participation in Del Val. Thank you. And that, not limited, and a full participation in Del Val, which is built, plumbed, and paid for, and limited storage options, no storage options in Los Vaqueros. Contra Costa is not participating in the additional storage in Vaqueros. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, on the service line emergency replacement program, what are these service lines that we're replacing? Residential, commercial, industrial?
We have two line items in the CIP. One is a proactive service line replacement program, and the second one is a reactive emergency service line replacements. If there is a service line break or failure, our district forces will go and replace that service line. In addition to that, if there is an indication that there are other service lines that are damaged, those are also replaced as part of the program. Because it's efficient to take care of all those service lines when we have the encroachment permit and this traffic control and other requirements are in place. So those are the projects that went into those two line items. And
I don't quite understand, Reka, because we tell our customers they are responsible for service lines.
So if we could
issues.
clarify this is between the main and the meter. This is not on the customer side of the meter. So it's on the street side, not the customer side. So between the district's mainline pipe, the service line that connects our mainline pipe to the customer water meter.
So is this based on past incident data that we know in some predictable way that we're going to have a number of emergency?
Yeah, I think the
every year?
emergency service line replacements are based upon prior data and what we see as costs that we need to make sure that we're planning for. And to answer your question, it's any kind of service line material that needs to be replaced. You know, in an unplanned way, that's all included in that line item.
So how come this doesn't go on forever? Like main renewal? It ends.
The emergency service line or
Yeah.
the,
Service line emergency replacement program, line 23.
Mr. Aaron's, I think that's your world, right?
Yeah, generally, I was gonna say that it does go on forever, but I noticed it doesn't in the funding analysis. Good
Well,
question. I mean,
let-
over time, you would think it would taper off as, you know, you repair more, but they're gonna continue being repaired. This is where our distribution and maintenance division charges. So when they go out every day, every weekend repairing service lines, this is where that gets charged. Why it's not continuing out, I'll have to look at that. It could have been an oversight just in filling out the forecast.
So we recover the money that is being spent here?
No, this is an expense
Sure.
to maintain the system.
Okay. Well, maybe you could take a look into that. And the other question I had is, we're just starting on the Alameda Reservoir roof replacement. And I got the notice in the mail, I think 2 weeks ago. Because I live in that neighborhood, and it had a start date and an ending date for the project, which was about a little over a year. So how come this is going on 4 years over here?
So that,
Line
I could ask.
50.
that was a good
Go ahead.
question. Yes, that was a good question. Contractually, the requirement on the contract is 12-month or 14-month contract duration. But in terms of making sure that our request for these budgets in the next 2 years, to make sure it's realistic, and if we run into anything that is outside of our control, we incorporated some of those factors as part of our budget estimating process. Because a lot of times we enter into these projects thinking that everything will go perfect, but when we find out that there are things outside of our control, without incorporating that buffer into the budget, it's hurting us at the end because we are not unable to spend all the money identified. So that's the reason we spread out the budgets across multiple years. And also by the time the project is completed, all the invoicing is submitted to the district and the change orders are all taken care of. If there are any change orders, that effort is going to take some time based on our experience on other projects. To account for those factors that are outside of our control, we spread those budgets, but the total cost is still there in the CIP line item.
Another question on the reservoir outside of the budget. I've been inside the reservoir a couple of times, and one concern I had is it's really close to the Hayward Fault, and the structure's being held up by quite thin. I don't know what you call
We call them slender columns, and that's bad for seismic performance.
them.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we redo the reservoir, are we putting in something that is seismically sound?
That is
Yeah, I'll
correct.
let Ray could.
Well, this project will address the seismic enhancements necessary, both from the perspective of the roof. The material that we are using for the roof will enhance the seismic feature for the project, and also the columns are going to be investigated, and that's part of the project scope to reinforce those columns according to the seismic code requirements.
Are we
Yes.
reinforcing the current columns, or are we going to completely replace them?
No, we are
If I could jump in. Yeah, I could jump in. So as part of the roof replacement, we're installing additional piers or piles, buttress piles, to transfer the load from these columns to the end of the perimeter of the reservoir. So essentially, those columns would be carrying much less load than they are carrying today.
I see. Okay. Then the last question I have here is on the, where is it? The Driscoll Road project, main renewal. How many miles of renewal are we doing there?
We are looking at a total of 1.6 to 1.7 miles of pipeline.
And why is it taking 4 years to do that job?
So that was again related to permitting requirements and factors outside of the agency control. So there had been some discussions going back and forth with City of Fremont, requiring us to replace the AC, to remove the AC mains after the new pipeline is installed in a different trench. So we had to go back and forth on their requirements because that's going to, the pipeline was intended for future utility, and based on our current main renewal program, we have not incorporated removal of AC pipes from the system. And it's going to make the program way more expensive because we already looked at those costs. And that was the reason we had to negotiate with City of Fremont on Driscoll to make them remove that requirement on this project. So we recently got approval from the City of Fremont to proceed on this project without having to remove the AC pipes after they are left in place for future use. So that was one reason. And then this project also requires permit from Kinder Morgan, which is a jet fuel pipeline that supplies fuel to San Jose Airport. There were certain requirements as part of the Kinder Morgan agreement. So we just received the agreement from the Kinder Morgan. So that also took us several months to get those agreements in place.
And I would add, if I may, so yes, as Rekha said, we're just getting through the permitting process with Kinder Morgan, the jet fuel pipeline owner, which has been time consuming. What you see in the budget is the budget is spread over 4 years because we think the construction, due to its complexity, will take anywhere from 12 to 18 months based on our estimated duration. So this will account for that construction duration, plus the time, as Rekha indicated, those completion and closeout activities could take up to 6 to 9 months. So this is to cover that time duration and spread the dollars over those 3-4 years. And then this will be updated a year from now when we do the mid-cycle update based on the actual construction contract and duration.
I get the picture now. So why is the City of Fremont requiring us to take out old asbestos pipe? And I'm hoping the answer is not because they think it's dangerous to the environment.
Yeah, I think we'll talk some more about that in committee too, but in general, it has to do with the city's concern over the hazardous material of the substance in the pipe.
So they're going to require us on all of our future main renewals?
Those discussions continue, but on this particular project, we finally were able to secure the permit.
And is this true of Union City and Newark too?
Right now, just the City of Fremont. So I think as Ms. Gunther pointed out, we have a little bit different approach for our main renewal program in Newark and Union City than we do in the City of Fremont in order to account for that. But yeah, these are some of the reasons why that particular project's been delayed. Other projects in the City of Fremont having to do with needing to overcome those issues and concerns.
Is there any sound scientific basis for them laying this
Well,
requirement on us?
There's been a difference of opinions. Well, it's probably the most appropriate way to leave it for this evening.
I'm personally outraged. That's all I can say. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that captured the questions on the main renewal program, and just to highlight the approach that we are taking in budgeting and programming these projects. We looked at it from 3 different perspectives, group them into 3 buckets. One is a rehab, I think looking at the cost, the program costs are going up significantly. So we have identified projects that are appropriate for rehabilitation, which include CIPP lining. So there are some projects in the CIP, close to 7 miles of pipeline. We have accounted them for lining projects. Or, so that would come at a discount of 65%. So the cost of implementation of that project is going to be 35% of a regular normal project. So that's been incorporated into the CIP. And then we also added some premium for pipelines that would require a replacement in the same trench, and using Highland system, that premium cost is also incorporated into the CIP. And I also want to address another question related to environmental permitting. When it comes to the main renewal program, we do have very little budget that would be necessary for environmental permitting. Mostly when we have high groundwater, we either use NPDES, district-wide NPDES umbrella permit, or we get a special permit from USD to discharge after going through the treatment process. So that is already accounted in our main renewal program. Other than that, we do not have any additional environmental related expenses for the program. Next slide, please.
Is the project on Driscoll Road, the reason we're not relining the current AC pipe is because we're going to put in some kind of seismically safe
There are two
steel
reasons.
pipe or something?
Yeah, there are two reasons. Actually, that project, we have modeled the project to understand if in-kind replacement would be sufficient, but based on the modeling results, the pipe size would need to be upgraded. So we are using a larger pipe as part of this project. So when we have a larger pipe, the lining is not an appropriate technology. So that's one reason. And the new project is going to be a seismic improvement project similar to Alvarado Niles project. So we'll be implementing the same features for seismic enhancement.
Thank you.
And one final comment on line item 186, which is our recycled water proposal. Well, even though it's been moved to the end of the 25 years, I'd have no problem bumping it off beyond the 25-year line. So it wouldn't show up here at all. That's $99 million of toilet to tap.
To clarify that, that's not any sort of regional pilot project that we're working with other agencies in the region on. This is something separate. This is a future recycled water or purified water project that hasn't been fully identified. We've always had it far out into the CIP because of the expectation that we wouldn't need that as a resource for some time. And it may be replaced with something else. So that's why it's so far out. In the
Well, I have no problem putting it out, and I wouldn't mind pushing it off entirely. I'd note that we did do a study showing it was between $6,000 an acre foot to $8,000 an acre foot in current dollars if we were to go that route.
It will be
Thank
an
you.
entirely different board. We'll be looking at this.
Feel like me.
Okay, noted. And I'll move on to the next slide. So here is a list of projects. As I mentioned in the previous slides, we have added about 30 new projects to the CIP. Is there a question? Okay, so.
No, you're good, Reka.
Okay, thank you.
But
So,
the fear of having just to add on, the fear of having something on a project is some bizarre grant program will come along and we will want to get into the conga line and show that we have it in our CIP. So there is a risk when you put it in there that things can be moved up when the funding sources change and the politics turns weird. So thank you.
Reka, on the Paseo Padre takeoff, what part of Paseo Padre is that?
it's our existing takeoff on Paseo Padre. I believe that's the one that's closer to, I have to confirm that, to Aqua Adventure.
Kind of close to Central Park area.
Uh-huh.
So that's the takeoff, and the project is adding a transmission line from that takeoff to the blender facility to provide additional SFPUC supply, because this project will provide additional benefit of optimizing our groundwater resource for 1:2 ratio for hardness control, whereas when we are taking this takeoff from Paseo Padre, it's pure 1:1. So there are additional benefits that were identified as part of the engineering report recommendations to go with a pipeline project. But however, this project was put in the out years. This is not something that is scheduled for the near term. We will be conducting a study before we proceed with any and bring it to the board before we proceed with a transmission main project.
Is the beneficiary of this project the city of Fremont?
The beneficiary, I think it's the district project.
Yeah, the beneficiary would be our customers. It would help us improve operations for all of our customers.
Just trying to see if we could charge the city of Fremont.
It's their public right of way. So. So here is a list of all the projects. As I mentioned, we added 30 projects. I'm not going to go through every single project here, but as you can see, several of these are main renewable projects that we have added to the CIP. And these projects are identified as high-risk projects. Those are within the 90 top 5 percentile of our main risk model. And these are also validated with our operations using our institutional knowledge. So these were the projects that are added. And in addition to that, we do have some projects to improve reliability for treatment plant 2. There were few redundancy issues within the treatment plant that's limiting the production capacity of the treatment plant. So these are based on the engineering report recommendations, adding certain redundancies at the critical process points will help us increase the overall production capacity of the treatment plant, get it closer to the design capacity, and also provide redundancy during any critical outages. So those were the 4 TP2 related projects. And I think majority of these are mainline projects. And the booster station improvement B16, it was built as a temporary project. There is only one pump. But over the period of time, the temporary project became a critical pumping station for the district. So the project is recommended to add additional redundancy to add a second pump. And next slide, please.
You know, I am thinking just out loud here, but if you think about it in straight raw spending terms, I would be inclined to work on the projects in Newark and Union City first and not Fremont, and have this board pass a resolution that informs the city of Fremont that they are putting their citizens at a disadvantage in case there is a major earthquake on the Hayward Fault.
I think that is our current practice, although the board has not taken a formal action on that.
Yeah, we have had to navigate the rules differently in different jurisdictions, but we are moving forward in all 3 cities, but just in different ways. So I understand that there's frustration, and you know, we'd be happy to talk about this further, but right now we just want to talk about the dollar changes in the capital
Right.
program.
But I would like it if our displeasure was voiced from the board as a whole to the city council of Fremont.
I have a question. When we use the term pipeline renewal, is that accurate? Are we replacing the pipelines with putting a new pipeline in place?
It's both. The renewal is to give us a effectively new pipeline for the long term, and that sometimes we're relining the pipeline, sometimes we're replacing them, depending on the needs of the project. So renewal is a blanket term for everything.
Okay,
This to me sounds like an unfunded mandate. The city of Fremont says we require this, but then they don't pay for it.
All right. It is after 6. I understood there was a
Right, yeah.
desire to move through these, so I think we're back to Reka.
Can we go to the next slide?
If we, let me ask one more quick question. If we repurpose a pipeline for less than potable water, is that, is there still a request that we remove it and not repurpose it?
Well, I'll just say that those issues have been part of the discussion, the overall discussion, and there's different thoughts about that too. So we'd be happy to share more at another time. In no way does that impact what we're presenting this evening, though.
Okay, thank you.
Can we go to the next slide? I think this is another, the continuation of the list of projects that the board has not taken action at. And I think this, I don't have to go through every project here again. Some of them are the main renewal projects. We do have a technology master plan that's added to the CIP, and some additional projects related to fisheries facility that I mentioned, a programmatic line item to capture any required modifications based on the BIOP or other facility permits that we are undertaking. And then ACWD groundwater alternative data gap project. This is to add new monitoring wells into the system in order to understand the hydrodynamics of our Niles Cone Basin. So the project captured it, adding new monitoring wells. I think a total of 17 monitoring wells are proposed under this project. And the Alameda Creek low flow channel evaluation is again related to the ACFCD, Alameda County Flood Control District project that we will be reimbursing. It's part of the partnership. And this is an evaluation that the district is doing to understand the impact of the project on our groundwater resources. So with that, can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so here are some key changes to the budgets, starting with the year one budget changes. We have changed the budget for the Los Vaqueros Reservoir expansion, reduced the budget to $2.7 million. And we made some adjustments to AMI project, but overall the project costs remain the same. This is just a minor adjustment as we were navigating the USPR stop notice related to California tiger salamander, and we are working with the contractor to get the project back on track and meet the completion timelines required contractually. So this adjustment is only a timing adjustment, but the project is still continues to be on track. There were some adjustments to main renewal projects based on the timing of the project. Most of these that you are seeing here are timing changes, but not really budget reductions or additions. It's just we spread the project budgets based on the timeliness of completion or any other new information that we have for the implementation of these projects. Next slide, please. This is the proposed versus adopted budget for the following fiscal year. And again, the same concept here. Some of these project budgets have been reduced based on the new information we have or shifted, deferred to the future years. Overall, we added 7.4 million for main renewal program, but also there were some reductions to other main renewal projects, but overall it's just a change in the spread of the projects. Next slide, please. So this is a slide the board has seen several times. This is a graphical representation of our proposed versus adopted budget. The blue lines represent our adopted budget and red lines represent the proposed budget. In general, the near term, when I say near term, it's the 5-year term that I'm focusing on. So our average investments are in the range of $65 million per year based on this plan, and our out year investments are in the range of $72 million. Again, these are based on the needs identified as part of the CIP update process. But as we get closer to these projects, we'll be revising the budgets based on the actual information we have at that time. There are some out year exceptions that I wanted to make a note here. One is the Mission San Jose treatment plant recommissioning. This has been on the CIP line item for several years. So it continues to stay until there is a need to recommission the treatment plant. And we also have Valsitas pipeline project. This was an item that the board requested in the last round. So we added a project in the out year for adding a pipeline to as an alternative to the Valsitas channel. And the AMI is the last one. This is also an eco project or a project to redo the AMI project once we reach the end of useful life for the AMI meters that are currently being installed. So the usage is approximately in the range of 25 years. That's the estimated useful life. So these were some of the main projects that are shown in the exceptions in the overall 25-year program. And the next slide. So we continue to prioritize and maintain and upgrade infrastructure and diversified water supply. So that has been the focus, and the CIP budget is indeed guided by the strategic plan. 94% of the CIP supports our district strategic plan goals. Number one, cost effectiveness and value, and number two, water supply goals to enhance diversification of our water supply. So nearly $1.4 billion is going towards goal one, and then $300 million for water supply. And then we do have other initiatives and customer jobs that are 66%. This is not impacted. This doesn't impact our ratepayers. Next slide. So here is a graphic representing the reliability, how much budget is allocated for reliability versus other projects. So we have a majority of our budget is going toward reliability to improve reliability of our system, whether it's system reliability protection or seismic reliability. And then we also have water supply and water quality enhancements and environmental enhancements as part of the program. And water quality enhancement, PFAS will be a water quality enhancement project. So those are added as part of the 24% of the CIP budget. And the 4% is through the customer jobs, which has no impact to the rates. Next slide, please. So this is a graph or a chart showing the split by funding source. Nearly 57% of the CIP is influences the rates, which is a decrease from last year, from the last budget cycle. So we have a general fund capital of 46% and extraordinary expense of 11%, adding up to 57%. But our facility renewal fund and facility improvement fund, in addition to customer jobs, add up to 43% of our budget. And these would not directly impact the rates. Next slide, please. So just a quick refresher on capital versus extraordinary capital projects. In a simple terms, if a project at the time of completion results in adding a new asset or rebuilding an existing asset or improving an existing asset, then it comes under capital expenditure. So that's the reason majority of the projects that you see on the CIP are capital projects. However, we also have the projects identified in red. Those are extraordinary expense projects. These are unusual projects that will not immediately result in an asset or increase in the life of an existing asset. These are generally study projects or feasibility studies, optimization studies, or pilot programs, and also unplanned emergency events. For example, atmospheric storm event would come under an extraordinary expense for the district. So the next slide identifies the projects that are proposed as extraordinary expense in the 25-year CIP plan. Some of these integrated resource planning, because it's a study, feasibility study, and Los Vaqueros is also an extraordinary expense project at this time until we identify an asset related to that. And there are several other projects that are identified as study projects. And at the time when we have the recommendations and when we are ready to move forward with an asset replacement or addition of assets, at that time we'll transition these projects into a capital project. Next slide, please. So this is
I would like to, Reka, I'd like to just step in on that last slide. When it comes to recommissioning the Mission San Jose water treatment plant, you don't have to do it here, but I would like to hear down the road the ideas from our team here as to what the purposes of recommissioning would be. Who could be potential customers of water that is processed at that plant? For example, Santa Clara is participating in the Los Vaqueros project. Maybe they could use, we could lease or charge them for processing water that ends up in their distribution system.
Okay, thank you, Director Sethy. I made a note of that, and I'll bring this item back to the.
On that law. on that point,
Eventually, if we do get a Delta conveyance system, it could be used for that water as well, for the Bay Area.
I understand that there's been consideration on the part of Bosca working with San Francisco for eyeing the Mission San Jose plant as part of the system. San Francisco, if they get involved, particularly with Los Vaqueros, but even if not, may need to be able to provide additional treated water into the system.
It could be a revenue generator for the water district.
Okay, thank you. And next slide.
Just full disclosure, somebody saw me shake my head at Laura. Laura was prepared to talk about how we are going to look at Mission San Jose as part of the IRP, all the factors surrounding it and so forth. And then I thought, no, we received the comment, we can keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Laura.
I could suggest also, not in the IRP, proposes an additional conveyance from the South Bay Aqueduct to our system, whether it be the Niles Canyon Aqueduct or a pipeline in Vallecito. We should be taking at least a study on, if not doing some work. Get the heck out of the open channel. Whenever you can.
Okay, noted. Next slide, please. Okay, this is another view of our program based on the programs, our large capital programs. If you remember in the past presentation during the last cycle, Fish Passage was taking a major portion on this pipe. However, now the focus has shifted from Fish Passage to main renewals and other capital, high priority capital projects. We also have budget allocated for completing the remaining AMI project, and also customer contributions is adding up to 4% seismic improvements, which are all related to reservoirs and tank improvement projects. Next slide, please. So in the last slide, I have identified other capital projects, which was a large portion of the pie. So some of those other projects are identified on this slide. Los Vaqueros is one with a total of $125 million. Vallecito's Channel Pipeline is $60 million project. So I have Niles Newark Intertie Pipeline and a large program, a continuous program, which is distribution PLC and SCADA upgrades and Paseo Padre takeoff steady pipeline. So these are the projects that are large dollar projects that are adding up in the other CIP. Next slide, please. Okay. So this is now I'm shifting from the 25-year plan to the proposed 10-year plan. This provides a graphic of how we are going to implement these programs in the next 10 years. And again, the fish is very tiny on this chart, which used to take more than 50% of the overall budget. So that has the focus has shifted here to the top bars. The bottom bars are our programmatic line items, which are customer contribution, service line, and meter replacements. So those will continue to stay on the program. And other capital, as I mentioned in the previous slide, adds up to a large portion in the next 10-year program. Main renewal program and AMI and seismic improvements are going to be our focus in the next 10-year plan. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I'll be focusing on the 2-year budget. For year one budgets, just for general information of the board, I'll categorize them into 3 major categories. One is committed investments. So what this means is if the projects are already in construction or if we are already in contracts, the timeline of the project is very certain. So we have high confidence in these investments. So those projects are contributing to about $30 million in year one budget, because these projects are either already in construction or we already have contracts that likely we have all the permits in place. So we'll be able to proceed with those. And then category 2 is shovel-ready projects. An example of this project would be Driscoll. The project is ready to go into construction. We have the bid package ready, but we are waiting for agreements from Kinder Morgan. So these are the type of projects that we have categorized into. The project designs are ready, but we are still waiting for permits from external agencies or some other factors outside of our control. So those are the ones that are ready, shovel-ready projects that add up to about $7 million. And there were some projects, the timing of these projects is completely outside of district's control. These are city required relocations. We do have a couple of projects that we have added to the CIP. One is from Union City and one is from City of Newark, central grade separation projects. So these projects, when we budgeted, we wanted to ensure that there is budget allocated for these relocations. However, the timing is dependent on city's timing, although the indication is they are moving pretty fast and they wanted to complete their portion of the project as soon as possible. We're trying to be careful in not putting all the budget in these years. So we have some design dollars and review dollars as part of this. But these are actually the actual implementations are in the out years, and those will be shifted based on the timing of the cities, as we don't control the timing on these projects. So that's the third category. And then next slide, please. So these are the projects. As I mentioned, we do have 200 projects in the CIP and more than 40 projects for year one. I did not identify every single project that will be working in year one, but certainly we do have a lot of challenging projects that will keep the district busy, staff busy, but I only identified projects that are more than $500,000 on this chart. And these are mostly some of the large programs or projects that staff is working on or will be working on in the coming fiscal year. Next slide, please.
Hey, Rick, I would like to do a time check here. You're on slide 80, and I think there are a total of 146 slides. And Director Akbari, I don't know if you heard it at the beginning of the meeting, but he needs to leave by 7 o'clock.
We're actually getting, I think, pretty close to the end. I think 146 is the length of the budget document that was attached, but the slide count is fewer. So I think Rekha has just a couple left, and then I'm looking at Mr. Alm to move quickly through our financial planning metrics, and I think we can probably be done in 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you for allowing me to do the time check. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. As Mr. Wandler mentioned, I have 2 more slides. The second 2 slides are related to year 2 funding. Again, the same categories are applied for this. As you can see, 61 million and committed is 23 and shovel ready are 19. Next slide, please. And this is a list of projects that are greater than $500,000 that we'll be focusing on in year 2 as part of year 2 investments. So with that, this completes the CIP program. And I'll take any questions now. Otherwise, I will pass this on to Mr. Ohm.
Okay, any questions? Just one quick thought. In your list, consider a contingency operations equipment and supplies as a line item. If we put that in our budget, sort of for a response to a whatever the contingency might be.
So we certainly have contingency dollars on the expense side. I'm not sure about the capital side, but we'll take a look and see if we need anything, we would add it.
Oh, our
Um,
Specialized equipment, vacuum excavators and other things that would be needed should we go into a contingency operation mode.
We have that type of equipment now, but if you're talking about additional
This would be
equipment,
our materials, stockpile of supplies, bill of material, whatever
Okay,
it might be, so we have direct access. to it.
so as discussed during our workshops on that topic, our approach is to complete the planning process, identify those things, and then add them to budgets as appropriate. So as it stands right now, we've not identified those things yet.
I'm working on it for a long time. Thank you.
So just as we wrap up that item, what I believe I've heard is a couple of things, mainly checking on some of the existing numbers that are in the CIP, the emergency service line replacement program and so forth, make sure that that there are dollars there if we're planning on dollars there. Beyond that, I haven't heard suggestions for any particular changes in the CIP. So we would bring back this same CIP for adoption in June, along with the budget.
Made some suggestions, but I haven't gotten
It's
acknowledgement
reviewed
from
every
other
single
board
year.
members.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
One slide that we wanted the board to focus on and really get your feedback and your guidance on the assumptions that's in the financial planning model. So this is the part that we look at the long range forecast in addition to the 2-year budget. We already talked about the updated water demand forecast for the adopted budget and the current financial planning model compared to when you saw it during the rates process. You heard a lot about CIP. There's increases in the CIP, particularly in the PAYGO general fund CIP. That issuing, Director Sethy has a very good question already. Previously, we showed a $30 million debt issuing in fiscal year 25. That's fiscal year 24-25. But based on our cash flow, that's the purpose of the financial planning model, is to look at the long range and then see our ending fund balance. And we assume a debt service both in the amount and when to issue that debt based on our ending projected ending forecast. So you'll see that in the next slide, why now it's a $20 million issuance and then a $25 million issuance. So 2 separate issuances starting in fiscal 26. So we'll move that 1 year out. And then the other important one is the annual 4%.
When would the second issuance be?
In the following year. So I will just jump to that because you already saw the other one, all the other assumption. So this is the general fund ending balances. So based on this, the fiscal year 25, you see a positive, healthy fund ending fund balance or cash balance in fiscal year 25. That's when the initial debt issuance was assumed. And then based on all the assumptions, the CIP costs, all the operations built in, we anticipate, I'm just going to jump straight to the debt issuance here. This is proposed budget at the bottom and the rates process at the top. Because it's pink color shaded is the debt issuance. Previously it was $30 million in fiscal year 25. Currently it's assumed fiscal year 26. That's fiscal year 25, 26, the amount of $20 million. And then the additional debt issuance of $25 million in fiscal year 28. Again, this is looking at the needs to issue this debt as currently with all the assumption built in. So jumping back to these, the other one is the debt. I mean, the water demand forecast, the debt coverage ratio here, very healthy. You already heard about that. Is very familiar to you. We're very close to covering operating expenses with operating revenues. Very close. actually, as a matter of fact, as the proposed budget, the operating revenues do exceed slightly the operating expenses. However, when we look at rates and charge
That's
revenue,
exactly where I like to see it.
we're heading that way because you look at the rates process, we're not there, but we're getting close to that. But we talked about this earlier. Rates and charges revenue does not cover revenue requirement in addition to general fund CIP. So that's where you see it here. That's when we talked about using the accumulated reserve to fund CIP in addition to property tax revenues and interest income and so on. And we have an healthy interest income, as you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, and I will just add that I like the fact that we're including depreciation in our expenses, because years ago, before I was on the board, the district did not try to cover depreciation and amortization. That only changed after I joined the board and tried to push us in that direction. And I'm glad to see it being adopted every year in our budget and financial forecasts.
Thank you. So we talked about that. We already talked about that. So that ends our presentation of the budget, and I will hand it over to Mr. Wunderlich to talk through the next steps.
Sure. So we've gone through quite a bit of material in 2.5 hours this evening. And, obviously we've received some feedback in terms of, perhaps looking at the approach to CIP delivery and appropriate staffing levels, some feedback as far as highlighting the number of temps and interns included within the budget. Obviously comments about specific project line items. But based on what I've heard this evening, I haven't heard any specific requests for any changes to the actual appropriations proposed in terms of what we'd be bringing back to the board for approval. So I guess this is kind of the last chance to speak up if you had a specific change you wanted, so that we could prepare for that when we finalize the budget. Director Sethy.
I'm like the kid in the classroom that wants to answer the teacher's question first. So I do have a suggestion for putting some money in the pot here in our budget. I talked to Mr. Stevenson last week, and also John Varela, who is the chair of the new Aqua Foundation that was formed last fall. And they have 5 suggested funding levels, really as they see it, tied kind of to the revenue size of a district. So we're the 10th or 12th largest water district in the state. And they have a funding level from $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, and $50,000. And the commitment is to do this on an annual basis. And the foundation is, I'll just read from what it says here: committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they're working within with education, research, and outreach for workforce development to replace the employees that are retiring out. So let me read what it says here. Contribution annually to the Aqua Foundation is required to maintain sustaining partner status. In addition, if a contribution is made by the end of this year, district will be designated as a founding partner of the Aqua Foundation in perpetuity. And my suggestion for the board to consider is to make an annual contribution of $25,000 based on size of organization that we are.
What level of the 5 is that?
That's partner. That is the second level.
So,
Champion is 50,000.
so I do have a question. I assume ratepayer fund cannot be used for this purpose, correct?
I think actually it would be
Okay.
appropriate to use ratepayer funds because the intent of this foundation is to develop the workforce for the water industry, which again, it's not maybe super direct specific to ACWD, but for the water industry, which I could see having benefits back to the district.
So I just want to make sure it's legally allowed, because what I don't want is to take away from the pot of money we have for Help on Tap. So that is the only bottom line I have. I think it's a great idea, but not at the expense of our Help on Tap program.
No, I think the level that's been suggested would not in any way influence our
Okay.
Help on Tap program.
All of the expected funders of the foundation are water districts.
But
That-
we have also seen some water district has much more creative way of funding things. I am still wondering how some of them become sponsors at the conference lunches.
Well, that's why the foundation was being promoted last week at Aqua, rather than having a guest speaker. They really wanted to shine the light on this foundation. I think it is a very healthy thing for us to be involved in. This is an industry-wide issue that we're dealing with, and the intent here is if you heard at the end of the Region 5 meeting last week, John was talking about going out to high schools, junior colleges, senior colleges, technical schools that are give private education, things like that. And so I see this as key to not only the whole industry, but to this agency.
I definitely be on board. I think it's a great idea, and it fits well into trying to do recruit more folks into the water industry. So happy to sign on.
No, I would support that program as long as it doesn't impact our long-term assistance Help on Tap program. I'm totally with it.
Okay, John?
It's one of many programs that are out there, but it's with Aqua, so it's even though it's not totally it is totally independent of Aqua, which is important to note. But I would not object to it. And if it would help fund our internship program, all the better.
They mentioned at the Region 5 meeting at also at the luncheon that the intent is to raise $1 million by the end of the year. So you need quite a few $50,000 sponsors to get there. I didn't want to put that big a burden on the district right now, so I thought 25,000 makes us a sustaining partner, and we'll see how things work out in the future. And then at the end of the year, they're going to go completely independent of Aqua.
Okay, so I think I saw 5 nodding heads for adding that to the budget. Of course, the board hasn't approved that yet. The board would approve including that into the budget when the board adopts the budget. So we will add that line item annually.
Great.
I'd like to make one quick observation. We still have a little bit of time.
2 closed sessions.
And we had a report that showed our water sales for the past 20 years and showed a continuing decline. Even through times of drought, the rebounds always seem to be less and lower. I note that in our current CIP proposal, the water consumption is proposed to have stabilized and slightly increased, reversing that trend. We need to really take a look at this as we keep going down the path and see if that assumption is correct, and if the conservation program we have makes financial sense.
Yes, so those projections are done in collaboration with our Water Resources Department. And it is based on the increase in demands we saw following the past drought, as well as improved metering accuracy we expect to result from the installation of ultrasonic meters in most customer meters through the AMI project.
No, that may well be the case, and particularly if we can switch to ultrasonic on the larger meters, you get even a better return. So, thank you.
Yeah, so based on what I've heard, then we will, I think we've gotten the feedback we need to prepare a final budget for board adoption. So we will, unless one of my colleagues here is telling me there's a need to repurpose the May 25th workshop, I think we will not have a workshop May 25th.
Hooray.
We will prepare this budget for board adoption June 8th. If the board does act to adopt the budget June 8th, then we would not need a special board meeting June 22nd for the purpose of budget adoption. Again, we don't know what may happen between now and then. It could be that there's still a need to engage with the board on a special topic June 22nd. So I would say don't remove that one from your calendars yet. May 25th, I think, is pretty safe to remove from your calendar, but not June 22nd yet. Mr. Stevenson, I think, is nodding his head in the affirmative on that.
I would totally agree. But, you know, stuff happens and you may get an email tomorrow saying, oh, we need next week's meeting too. But I'd say that odds are pretty low. So I think the helpful feedback that the board provided this evening will get us on our way. We won't need that workshop next week.
So we appreciate the board's engagement on this topic today. And I think we're ready to prepare that final budget for June 8th. And that concludes the financial workshop for this evening.
I want to thank everybody on the board for working efficiently. So we will move on to item 5 on the agenda, the general manager's reports.
That's just a reminder that we may not have a meeting next week, but we do have another meeting this week, and that is tomorrow. So be here with bells on 6 o'clock. That completes my report.
Any director's comments? No. I have one. So a month ago at our board meeting, I reported that Tulare Lake was at 30 square miles. Normally there's no water there, right? Then a couple of weeks ago, I reported it was 100 square miles. And on the weekend, I read it was 100,000 acres and 156 square miles. San Francisco is only 49 square miles. So it's more than the city and county, 3 times the city and county of San Francisco. And by the end of, I think this coming week, they're estimating it would be over 100 and getting close to 200 square miles. So you're talking about all of Fremont, Newark, Union City, and all of Hayward. That's how quickly it's growing.
Throw one quick point. The Kern River is now being diverted into the California Aqueduct that goes south. Since that's Kern water, might we get credit for that as part of the semi-tropic equation? So throwing it out as an option at much lower cost.
That's my only report. Thank you.
All right. So item 7 is convening into closed session for 2 items. Pat, would you like to read us in?
I'd be happy to. It's now 6:45 and the board is going to convene into closed session for 2 items. 7.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated negotiators are Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and David Serrano. The employee organizations are the Operating Engineers Local 3 and the ACWD Operators Association. The second closed session is item 7.2. It's pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, also a conference with labor negotiators. The agency designated negotiators are Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and David Serrano. And this time it's the unrepresented employees, management, confidential, and professional employees, and we can now convene into closed session.
Okay, it's 7:04 and we've just returned from closed session, and I think our general counsel would like to read us back from closed session.
Yes, happy to do that. Thank you. The board met in closed session for 2 items. First item was 7.1 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators. Agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and David Serrano. Employee organizations, OE3 and ACWD Operators Association. And in that closed session, no action was taken. The board met for a second closed session, item 7.2 pursuant to California Government Code Section 54957.6, conference with labor negotiators, agency designated negotiators Ed Stevenson, Jonathan Wunderlich, and David Serrano. For the unrepresented employees, management, confidential, professional employees, and no action was taken in that closed session. And that concludes the open session report on the closed sessions.
Great. Any other business?
Yeah, we have return to open session. We have item 8.1, consideration of terms and conditions for an updated memorandum of understanding between the Alameda County Water District
Right.
and the operating engineers local 3 to incorporate changes to state law, the CalPERS Health Benefits Program.
Right. So David is going to lead us in.
That's right. You want to take it away, David?
Thank you, members of the board. Good evening. On this item, the state legislature adopted and the governor signed into law several bills that impact our current collective bargaining agreements. Additionally, CalPERS made changes to the health plan offerings that require collective bargaining agreements to be amended. Finally, the district has been modernizing the water meters throughout the district to AMI, which adds various technological advancements and requires our personnel to undertake additional training and take on new level of duties and responsibilities. The district and OE3 having met and conferred and have agreed on the following items for presentation to you this evening. Amendment to Article 11.02 to reflect AB 1041 of the legislative session 2022. This is referred to as a designated person. This law went into effect on January 1, 2023, and provides that an employee may utilize family sick leave and California Family Rights Act leave for a designated person. The legislation defines a designated person as any individual related by blood or whose association with the employee is the equivalent of a family relationship. No additional family sick leave hours are provided, only that the categorization of family members for which sick leave may be utilized is expanded for a designated person. Amended Article 12.02 to reflect AB 1949 through the legislative session of 2022. This is referred to as the bereavement leave. This new law provides that employees shall have 5 days of bereavement leave to be used within 3 months from the date of death. The district already provides 3 days of paid bereavement leave plus a paid 4th day if travel was required beyond 400 miles. Per the new state law, employees may utilize other accrued leaves for unpaid bereavement days. This change to the OE3 MOU is consistent with state law and allows OE3 covered employees to utilize up to 5 days of bereavement leave and utilize other accrued leave for pay for any unpaid days. This change does not increase the amount of district paid bereavement leave. Article 1204 was amended to comply with AB 1041, again of the legislative session 2022. This was affectionately referred to as a designated person. As mentioned, AB 1041 changed and amended California Family Rights Act to allow an employee to utilize the CFR leave for a designated person. Article 18.01A and 18.01A through E reflects changes to CalPERS PEMCA health plans. CalPERS, effective on January 1, 2022, eliminated 3 PPO health plans, the PERS Care, PERS Choice, and PERS Select, and created 2 new options, PERS Platinum and PERS Gold. These revisions provide consistency with the new PERS health plan naming conventions. The revisions do not change coverage options nor the funded benefit levels authorized by the board. The final item is a job title change. The customer account field representative will be changed to customer account field technician 1 or /2 to reflect the technological updates of the analog meters to AMI and related maintenance duties, along with entry level and journey level ranges of responsibilities. The salary will mirror the utility worker 1-2 salary band and go into effect on July 1, 2023. The overall salary schedules will be presented to the board during the normal procedures for all salary schedules in July of 2023. With that, is recommended the board approve by motion these changes outlined here and in the OE3 MOU, and authorize the general manager to finalize and implement these changes immediately. With that, I respectfully submit to the board and answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions, comments?
I'll make the motion.
Yeah, yes, please.
I'll second.
Directors Gunther,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Huang,
Aye.
Weed,
Aye.
and Sethy.
Aye. And do we have any other business?
That is all for this evening. Number 9 adjourned.
So I will adjourn the meeting
All
at
right. I have 7:10 PM. Thanks very much, everybody.